So for our portrait assignment, we're going to want to effectively crop our photo to emphasize the emotion as well as create the best composition. So while we're going through this presentation, you're going to want to make sure that you are filling in your notes on this handout. If you are not in class, you can make a copy of the document if it works. There we go, it's loading slowly. Or in class, I would have given you a printed version. So I just wanted to show you this here. I would like you to describe in a few moments the composition here. Everyone's going to decide which one's the best one, and then we'll fill out the handout. So we'll define what crop is, why we crop, and then we're going to make a list of to-dos and don'ts. On the back side of the handout, there is directions for step-by-step on how we're going to complete this assignment. This will also be done on our agenda where you'll be able to see what we'll do on each given day. So let's go ahead and go back to the presentation and get started. So what we're going to do is look at these two photos. You can see that they're actually the same image, but which of them has the best composition? So in the space provided, go ahead and write your conclusion. When we have a photo, we want to be able to think about how we can make our photo the most interesting as well as original. And so one of the things that we can do is we can crop, we can change the photo. So make sure that you define this for yourself. You've probably done this 100 times on your phones when you've taken images. But to crop is to cut off or mask out unneeded parts of an image. So why would we possibly want to crop something? One, we want to get rid of the parts that do not help the composition, right? The arrangement. Two, to get across the meaning of the work, emphasizing what's most important. And then lastly, to change the composition of the photographer to make the work more original and more your own. If I go too fast, feel free to pause as you go along. Notice that the key words to fill out on the form are in yellow or underlined. So here's an example of a crop, right? So taking a portion of the image. So one of the things to think about when you're using a photo is that technically I took your photo. You came up with the idea of it. So cropping is enough to make it have more ownership. But if you were to take an image online and just crop it, that would not be significantly changing it enough because you had nothing to do with it. So if an image is taken by another person, you need to really make sure that you alter and change the meaning. But once again, since this was for this assignment, you did have some ownership. So you have to change the composition. You can't keep it exactly the way that I took it. And it's not going to work either way for the format of the assignment, which I'll explain later. So let's go ahead and start filling out our do's and don'ts on the worksheet. Don't center your face. This is the most common idea. And so this is what we often see amateurs doing or people who are not artistic, or it's kind of like the first go-to. So we really want to stay away from this because it normally lacks visual movement or balance. Instead, I want you to place your face off sides. See how in these two identical photos, I shifted my face either to the left or the right to create asymmetrical balance. Especially if on your last assignment you use symmetry, really force yourself to try asymmetry for this one. Now, center does work occasionally, and it's really good if you do some sort of extreme close-up, something with a lot of intensity. So once again, there's always do's and don'ts, and there's always things that you don't want to do in art, but there's always breaking those rules too. You just got to make sure that it really creates intense meaning. Try really hard not to crop too close to your head or to your neck. Looking at these photos, you might see that it almost looks like I'm decapitating myself, or I am creating more of a claustrophobic image, or just creating kind of an awkward sort of balance here in this horizontal, right? So we really want to make sure that we don't crop too close unless it helps with the meaning. Another thing that you can do is give yourself space to look. Now I'm looking up, so in my composition, I give myself some extra space up. Sometimes if I crop too close, it actually has kind of a contradictory effect. I'm looking up, but it's almost like I'm more angry in this picture. Maybe it's also because it's in red. But it kind of gives me nowhere to look. So it's also often nice if your eyes are shifted to the left, maybe you want some space on the top and on the left side to create more drama. A better example of this here, you can see I'm looking off to the side, I give myself some space. The one over here, it's really cut close. I actually used this one for an example that I'll put up on the chalkboard later, where I actually intentionally did that so I felt like I was boxed in. Try to focus on the emotion. When I took the photo, I tried to incorporate basically your head and shoulders, but you probably want to crop in to really emphasize the expression on your face. So don't include a bunch of unnecessary information. Do balance the positive and negative space. In a portrait, your positive space is you, and the negative space is going to be the background. You really want to think about how much space you include. When I'm thinking about space, I often want to shift the visual weight. Here I shifted myself to the left. Here I shifted myself to the right. And I want to think about how much background there is compared to me. So one of the things you probably don't want to do is leave half background and half portrait. We really don't want to do 50-50 space. Instead, we want to think about maybe 30-70 or 60-40, where we're kind of shifting it, right, and having less background showing. Do choose the format that works best for your image. I have a very long head and a very long neck and a very long forehead. And so for me, I think my crops work much better as a vertical. The horizontal format has a bunch of unneeded background space, and it really doesn't help with my expression. So you really want to play with either a portrait or a landscape and see which one works best for your image. Right? So here's a rough list of, once again, of what you should write in the do's and the don'ts, and you want to take this into consideration when you're cropping your image. You'll have this right next to you while you actually do the cropping. So pause this if you need to write down any of these notes. There are so many choices. I want you to keep in mind that you're really not tied down to one answer to the question. So we can really focus on different ways to crop them. There's different solutions. There's a bunch of great ways to do it and a bunch of bad ways to do it. We really want to focus on those do's on the list. So your images can be vertical or they can be horizontal. They can even be square. So what I'd like you to do in the classroom situation, if you're at home, you can look at this. I want you to think about which crop is more visually interesting, why or why not. I actually intentionally chose one, or two images, I should say, that have both positive and negative traits. So if you chose the one on the left, maybe you like the balance between the figure and the shadow. Maybe you liked the emotion that was created because of it being kind of stuck in the corner and feeling a little bit more like foreboding. Maybe on this one, you like this one because it really focused on the portrait and really emphasized the face and the emotion. But maybe you didn't like this one because the face seems a little bit centered. Maybe you didn't like the one on the left because the head's too close to the edges. Really make sure that when you crop, you're emphasizing the expression on your face. Make sure that you're cropping and including all the visual imagery that's necessary to make sure that we can tell it's you. So when we're cropping, I do not want you to zero in on just the eyes or just the nose and just the mouth. We're going to be showing the whole part of the face. Now let's go ahead and begin cropping.